Hello, I am Maya Adams, and I am going to be talking about the Volkswagen emission scandal today. Forgive me for the lighting. My power just went out. I'm sorry. So, the question really is what happened? Why did Volkswagen have this scandal? Well, from 2009 to 2015, Volkswagen secretly installed what they call the defeat device software in 11 million diesel vehicles that they sold. The software detected when a car was being tested for carbon emissions, and it temporarily reduced the nitrogen oxide output to pass the needed standards. This worked by the sensor telling the nitrogen oxide trap to hold the nitrogen oxide while the vehicle was being tested. As you can see, the main computer, that's where where in the upper side is where that defeat device was installed. Sorry, excuse me, where that defeat device sensor was, and then there's that trap in that on that right hand side, that orange trap. The result from these nitrous oxide emissions is during the 6 year time span, the nitrogen oxide emissions reached an all time high with the uh, mainly in the rural driving. This created emissions being over 38 times the legal limit in the Volkswagen Jetta, which you can see on that top right hand side. And in the 2012 Volkswagen Passat in rural areas, it was 17 times over the legal limit. There's significantly less, but it's still drastically over. As you can see, that red line is where the U.S. limit is, and the orange is where we are at now with Volkswagen in those respective times. This is harmful because it can leave lasting health and environmental issues, some of which can include respiratory problems, smog, acid rain, and indirect greenhouse gases. This is very harmful for people who have asthma already. If it already has respiratory problems, this can be very detrimental to people's healths. Along with the smog and acid rain, this can really affect the environment and cause lasting effects that can harm and be detrimental. Some of the key ethical issues was the deliberate deception and the fraud that took place with Volkswagen. They intentionally programmed these vehicles to have this cheat code almost to standardize these emission tests. And it was something that was calculated over a long time to be able to figure out what kind of prototype, what kind of actual product they could put into these diesel vehicles to make it so it would pass these like emission standards. And this is something that deceived their stakeholders, their customers, the public, and the United States government. Like it's that was very unfortunate what they did. This also was a breach of stakeholder trust, as I just said. The customers who were purchasing these vehicles, they were advertised as environmentally friendly. Investors and regulators and governments, they all were misled by this data, and the scandal was really showed how this was like a fundamental betrayal of every key stakeholder group. As I said in the previous slide, there was public health harm. These excess nitrogen oxide emissions were linked to premature deaths. After this news broke out, people were able to relate this back to premature deaths. In Europe and in North America, as the leadership was profiting off of the lack of well-being and safety, it resulted in extreme air pollution and really harmed the ozone layer, especially with it being over 30 times the limit. This was a systemic and organizational failure. This deception was something that was required from multiple sections of the Volkswagen team to be in agreement of. And this was like the engineering team, the leadership, and the executive teams. They were all making these poor decisions together, and it shows how deeply embedded it was in their culture to be compliant over critically thinking and being able to make a change. And the connections I see to the course concepts from this class is the ethical leadership failures. Volkswagen executives modeled their unethical behavior from the top. They demonstrated how leadership sets the ethical tone for the whole entire organization, and obviously they did a poor job at that. They showed the opposite of what you should be doing. Stakeholder theory, rather than balancing the interests of customers and the regulators, stakeholders, and communities, the leadership prioritized their short term market performance, which failed them. They wanted to have a simple fix to gain profit off of. They didn't want to take the time out of the time and the money to be able to fix the problem to make the nitrogen oxide levels go down. So instead, they thought this would be a better idea. Emotional intelligence. The leaders were more focused on their need for performance. They disregarded those who didn't feel comfortable with these new additions to the vehicles, and their lack of emotional intelligence created an environment where people were afraid to speak up and afraid to question the processes. Like I said, the leaders didn't want to have to put a halt in their manufacturing and redesign their engines, and instead they chose to make this small fix. But when the engineers, they wanted to speak up, they felt like they couldn't. They felt like they were being disregarded, and it was just unfortunate. Whistleblowing. Many engineers were testifying that they brought up to their leaders that it would be illegal to install these devices. So this was a good thing. They tried bringing it up, but the executives and the leaders told them that it would be handled or they would just simply get ignored. The leadership failures. They directed engineers to install these cheat software pieces as a business decision. They suppressed the internal concerns and they discouraged ethical dissent. They didn't want anybody to speak up and they didn't want anybody to have a different thought than what they had. They also publicly denied their wrongdoing when they were exposed in 2015. After they already knew that they were at fault, they were still denied it. They also created a workplace culture where complying with leadership is more important than legal and moral obligations, and they failed to act when employees raised concerns on these ethical and economic failures. What should these leaders have done instead? Instead of what they did, they should have been transparent with their emissions and communicate challenges to seek better and compliant solutions. Strengthen the psychological safety for their engineers so they feel more comfortable with raising their concerns without fear. This could have stopped a lot of issues, and moving forward, they might have had some innovative pieces that might have made their company grow. And implement stronger whistleblower protections throughout the program. So, despite people speaking up, we need it to be something that's set in stone where people feel comfortable. They also need to accept the accountability of their actions and be able to course correct prior to this public outburst. They could have been able to do this, yet they chose not to. They chose to continue to deny it. The consequences and the aftermath, legally and financially, in the United States, there was a $14.7 billion settlement in 2016 after all the news broke out. Criminal charges were filed against the executives in U.S. and Germany, and the CEO, Martin Winterkorn, he resigned the day of exposure. He tried to flee rather than be a leader and own up to his mistakes. Multiple people went to prison, and the stock prices fell 35% from where they were at. Their reputation, they lost years of trust from people who were lifetime Volkswagen fans, and they were named one of the biggest scandals in business history. And they are still facing the ongoing scrutiny about their ethics and business practices. People are still a little bit, they don't want to go to Volkswagen, knowing what their past was. They might try to do something like that again. Hopefully not, but it's something that people have thoughts of. Socially and environmentally, there was 1,200 premature deaths in Europe that were tied to the nitrogen oxide emissions. And this scandal accelerated the significance of electric vehicles. Seeing that diesel products and seeing how much damage they can cause to the environment, people started leaning towards electric vehicles as a cleaner way to be able to transport yourself. This also prompted the EU to focus more on their emission standards and truly enforcing them rather than having a simple test. And what this case teaches us is that ethical leadership requires very serious moral courage, not just being a competent leader. Organizational culture can either set the tone that enables or prevents wrongdoing. Stakeholders need leaders who are going to act in genuine interest rather than going against it without the stakeholders knowing. This case really shows us that, you need to be able to have a team that is emotionally intelligent. You need to have people that are ready to speak up, and you need to have an environment where people feel comfortable doing so. If this is not the case, then issues like this can happen again. And this was a very big warning for companies to realize that if they're doing morally wrong behaviors, it will catch up to them, and finding the easy way is not going to work. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. These are my references. And yeah, thank you very much.